Attention all S4 attendees. We are excited to announce that Industrial Defender will be sponsoring the conference, and we invite you to join us for a happy hour on Monday, February 13th from 4 to 6 p.m. This is a great opportunity to meet the Industrial Defender team, enjoy some drinks and demos, and have some good conversation. Badge pickup starts at 4 p.m. Monday, so grab your badge and then swing by our Prime sponsor room to join us for a fun start to the week. That's Monday, 4 to 6 p.m. in our Prime sponsor room. See you in Miami. Cybersecurity concerns are ever evolving. OT cybersecurity is even more complex, and it's so much more than just software and hardware. How do you stay on top of it all? Aaron Crow has over 25 years experience with cybersecurity. 15 of those years focused on operational technology across multiple industries, and he wants to help you. Welcome to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Industrial Defender. Now here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Hey, Sean, thank you for taking time today. I'd love to have you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history, and let's just dive in, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So Sean Plankey here. Right now, I'm currently chief architect over at BedRock Systems. BedRock is it's a prevention cybersecurity capability, so a little bit different than the traditional detect and respond. But the whole idea is it's a zero trust framework application that functions down at the chipset level, mathematically verified through formal methods, right?
Oh, wow, that's cool.
A little bit different approach.
Yeah.
Came here after working at DataRobot, leading AI company, was trying to bring cybersecurity in the AI space, or I should say bring AI into the cybersecurity space.
Sure.
And was a CTO there as well. And then, of course, I have long history in and out of government. Worked the National Security Council on cyber policy, and specifically counter China and maritime. And then I was at Energy, at the Department of Energy, where I ran the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. So that is the office that works with industry to protect the critical infrastructure of America. And then, of course, veteran, prior military before that. Like the Shelby.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody, that's that Caesar thing that everybody's heard about, and the program that us, normal folks have heard about, and really interacting with the government, and how do we protect critical infrastructure, especially in the energy space.
That's right. 80% of critical infrastructure in the U.S. So that's energy, that's transportation, bridges, trains, planes, automobiles. Also, cloud computing is considered critical infrastructure. The financial sector, the list goes on. Water, wastewater, and water treatment. Those are all majority owned by the private sector. 80+% is owned by the private sector.
Yeah.
So the government can't just tell, not in our society.
Sure.
There are other countries in the world where they can, but not in ours.
Yeah.
The government can't just step in and impose operations on those environments. So the government has to work with the private sector to say, hey, how are we best protecting Americans from whether it be physical attack, which Caesar covered, as well as cyber attacks?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting, because a lot of our power utilities, there's big ones, that are, all the big name players that you've heard of, but then there's the little small municipalities. And then there's the wastewater, which is, the local municipality that I buy my water from. Like,
That's
those
right.
guys, they may have a receptionist and a few people working for them. They don't have a technology staff. So how are you seeing, and what concerns do you have? And those, the big companies probably have teams of guys and folks that are looking for this stuff. But those smaller municipalities and power utilities across the country, they don't have that. That's a big risk.
That's right. So municipalities generally have an IT person.
Yep.
And that IT person is supposed to be the security mechanism, as well as doing all ITs, everything from user accounts, like, I locked myself out again, got to unlock it, to just managing email and the various issues there. And then I'd like to say that person I mean, I've seen it where that guy is also, or men or woman, is also like the handyman on the site.
Sure.
Who's going out to, when a sensor is going off and they have an alarm going off in a pump system, they're going out there and they're resetting the alarm, maybe diagnosing an issue there, doing some minor electrical work even. So they're doing it all. And we got to remember those municipalities, and they're not just the small ones, right?
Sure.
Like, sure, while they are like small rural Pennsylvania or small rural, Maryland or Texas, there's also major municipalities, right? So the people of Los Angeles County have a municipality that provides power distribution and it provides water to Los Angeles County. And so their agreement for water goes all the way back to Colorado on the Colorado River, right? So that's a public-private partnership where it's in a semi-regulated industry, right? So they can't just say, as we've seen in the news, they can't just say, we had this issue, so we're going to raise the rates. The rates, and depending on the states, actually have to be approved by votes or by government, by the governor signing over the ability to raise the rate for a capital expenditure or operating costs. It's not a true capitalistic system, and in that way, things like security often get pushed to the bottom, right? Because we're so focused on just maintaining operations. You, me as taxpayers, we're in America. We expect to be able to turn on the water, be able to drink right from the tap, and we expect to turn on the light switch and the power to work, right?
And it all just magically happens in the background. Yeah, I've been part of quite a few large OT programs in power utility, et cetera. And some of those are regulated where, like you said, they go get a rate case. Say, hey, we're going to do this large capital project, and here's what we're doing with it, and here's the timeline, et cetera. And then they get a rate case for that, and then they use that budget for building out this capital program. But there's other municipalities and power utilities, et cetera, that don't have that. They can't go get a rate case. They just it has to come out of their bottom line. So I see different problems on both of those, but one may be able to get a large capital program without O&M, to the O&M tail to ongoing support, and then the other may have a hard time getting that capital budget because that same budget they're having to decide: am I going to do maintenance on a pump, or am I going to deploy this cyber technology? And the pump may make my facility run more efficiently, whereas the cyber in their eyes is just a cost center, right? It's not providing them efficiencies. It's just something that they have to pay for that they don't really necessarily even understand a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that actually brings up an interesting point. We talk about the capital expenditures that have recently come out of the federal budget, everything from $329 billion, I think, for green energy, to the IIJA, which is the the American Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. I may not a legislature guy, may have gotten that one not exactly right, but just I think it is. That money largely goes to those capital expenditures, right? And so states are now putting in packages saying, I'm going to put an EV charging corridor in. That was required, right? They had to, every state had to submit a 50 or a plan to put a EV charging corridor on their main road systems to, hey, we're going to put in a new dam. We're going to revitalize this dam, this bridge, this railroad system, whatever it may be. The problem is, like you said, those CapExes don't come with follow-on operating expenditure funds for the government.
Yeah. So
many of the states are, essentially nervous about what they're going to do with it. Or you've seen states announce things like in California, they went from a $33 billion surplus or some exorbitant number to, we're going to cut the taxes. We're going to give all that money back to people, to a $25 billion deficit almost overnight.
Yeah.
Because they're playing games with CapEx money versus OpEx money.
Right.
And where it's gonna be invested and how we're gonna support projects.
So a lot of that money that's coming out and things like that, well, I think it's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So
Did I say investment infrastructure? I might have said it backwards.
So how much of that, like, so they're doing these, putting in EV chargers, for instance, that's a great example. How much of how many times are they considering the cyber implications of that? Because if I'm plugging these things in, there's more than likely they're smart. They've got a network connection. I can configure them, which means there's some kind of cyber risk that I'm bringing in and plugging into the grid. I'm plugging into this infrastructure. How much of that is even considered in those numbers when they're putting those budgets out?
Right. So right now, it's very limited consideration. So a couple interesting items to note. So the White House held a EV charging summit to specifically talk EVs a few months ago. And NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which develops many of the industry-wide standards for security, for different measurements that we use in the government.
Yep.
They wrote they instituted a community of interest under the National Cybersecurity NCEP program that they have, where they're starting to figure out, hey, what should the cybersecurity standard be for EV,
right?
For EV charging stations, because it doesn't exist yet. Just like we don't like to think about it, but the dirtiest device that and let's think about technology today, the dirtiest device that we own, the one that's most susceptible to cybersecurity issues is this guy right here, right? The phone.
Yep.
And that's just me, saying I got the new one. 3 lenses.
That's right.
And so the phone now, why does that matter? Well, now we're getting in our car, Apple CarPlay, Android, connected to your phone. You can Bluetooth connect, you can Wi-Fi connect, we have mobile Wi-Fi in vehicles now. Our vehicles are now essentially as open to contamination as the phone system, right? We're plugging every vehicle in. How many people get in an Uber and they instantly, do you have a charger? And they plug their phone in to the random person's Uber, right? And then, then we go to an airport, then we're plugging in at an airport, right? We're plugging into all these contaminated spaces or using public Wi-Fi, and our phone becomes, it becomes the 5-year-old in preschool, just spreading a super spreader everywhere of whatever viruses or issues are going on. And so now we think of this, move it back to energy. So let's bring that back to energy. So now this charger, this car has a battery.
Right.
This battery is now being plugged in to a home charging station or an EV charger on the side of the road, right? And so that battery is now connecting and either drawing, or the battery can also push electricity back to that charger. And these people have to realize the home high power chargers that you're getting installed, they're charging at 220, 240 amps. But the extremely fast chargers that you see on the side of the road that can charge a vehicle in less than an hour, they're charging upwards of 400 amps.
Yeah.
Right? So 400 amps going down the line is a way to start fires. It's a way to, potentially surge power.
Right.
An EV charging station in and of itself draws more energy than an old school gas station, the entire gas station.
Yeah.
Right? So when we think of that change to the grid and the 50-year-old grid powered by municipal workers who don't have the assets and resources to manage this now distribution part of the network that is surging and sucking juice, you have a lot more risk, right? You have, when you have a 50-year-old power line that was normally, let's say, carrying 200, 300 amps, and is now in peak charging times, right? The drives homes for people 4 to 7 p.m.
Right.
Now has, an entire neighborhood of EV chargers sucking juice from the substation down this 50-year-old transmission line. What happens to that line?
And as they expand them, because if you think about even logistics of, every person has a car, And if you were going to pretend that every person then now has an electric car and they all have to be plugged in, and I've got apartment complexes and I've got restaurants and I've got shopping malls and all of those places, I'm going to have chargers for all of these vehicles to plug into to charge these vehicles up, because it's not like a gas station where I can service thousands and thousands of cars and rotate them really quickly. These cars are sitting there for an hour, even the fast ones. Whereas at a gas station, I'm in and out in 5 minutes and I can rotate my pumps, right?
So what happens to the load? What happens to that wire? It gets really hot.
Yeah.
It gets really hot, and it can start forest fires. It can start fires. I mean, we saw these wires. They actually did start fires in California, right, due to they weren't built to handle the current flows that they were getting, and that manifests itself in heat, and it can start fires, which then creates further problems. So when we think about that from a cyber perspective, right now we're saying, okay, that's just raw usage. But what happens when somebody tries to manifest that problem through cyber means, right? Could we create a draw or a surge in one direction or another that offsets the power supply in a regional area of a grid, right? That could be a significant problem. So we have to think about what type of securities we're putting in vehicles, what type of cybersecurity we're putting on the charging station itself. Because although we love, thinking about America, that we're protected by these two great big oceans on both sides, that EV charging station is susceptible to somebody walking right up to it, pulling the cover off, plugging things in, even it sounds crazy, but soldering something in, connecting some of their own device, whether it be, physically or just using a plug that was hidden before, or if the station has like Wi-Fi or some sort of comms, communications avenue built into it, right? All of these things, we have to think about cybersecurity in that edge contested space, right? It's an edge device on a contested space. It's a computer, so it's not like, maybe not be a traditional operational or industrial control system device, but it's not like what we think of as like, oh, it's a tablet or it's your, it's a computer where you email from or something like that.
It's all connected, and all this stuff is going to be connected to the cloud because you have an app in your phone that you can look up the chargers. It notifies you when your charge is there. Hey, you've got 5 minutes left in your charge. Head back to your car. I used a buddy's Tesla when I was in San Francisco for RSA last year.
You got better friends than I do. I would.
And same thing though, like it would text me when, hey, you've got 5 minutes left, because my wife and I would go grab coffee or something like that, and we'd come back to the car in time for it to finish up so we could move on down the road. So it's amazing. All of that stuff is connected. It's all cloud-based. It's all that kind of stuff. So I'm bringing all of that technology on the grid and connecting it in the cloud and on the edge that people can then attack potentially.
That's right. And that's a different paradigm shift than we've traditionally thought of as Americans, as computer users, as Generation X growing up, right?
And I know, like in traditional and power utility and a lot of the OT space, we've in the past tried to really disconnect those environments, whether they're air gapped or they're security in depth, they're 10 layers removed, Purdue model. Like, I'm not putting them on the internet anymore, right? So we've gotten intelligent about that. But as more and more of these connected systems, and we want this data, we're having that data get flown, going up through into the cloud, whether it's directly connected, hopefully not. But at some point, there is a connection path up to the cloud, and that edge is kind of moving closer and closer to that OT environment. That kind of makes people like me uncomfortable sometimes, but I also see the benefit of the value of, machine learning and cloud computing and all of that capabilities. But talk a little bit about the concerns around bringing that edge closer to OT, that IT and OT convergence, and where those risks are in that space.
Yeah, so we love to talk about cloud or edge, and the classic joke is cloud just means it's somebody else's computer.
That's right.
So when we think about that, and we think of these large data centers, let's call that the cloud. these large data centers that are processing huge amounts of data, transmitting, the backbone of the internet.
Yep.
And we realize that the user experience and what we want as consumers or as businesses is we need to get the information that we have at that sensor, at that endpoint, to be compiled and analyzed and then optimized for, and then we use it to then optimize our system. And so to talk about the conversation of the edge, that means we're doing things to bring that processing power back down the pipe, down to the consumer, or to right at the interface point, right? It may not be a consumer always, but
sure,
it's the edge of the business environment. And so we're entering a recession, right? So what type of investments are people going to make in this capitalistic society? They're going to think, okay, I need to optimize now, right?
Yep.
I'm not willing to take these big steps and put this giant bet on this dream, right? This innovative future. Instead, I'm going to find efficiencies in my current system. And so when I go to work to find efficiencies in my current system, that means I know I have this, let's say, OT environment,
sure,
right? Let's go with a manufacturing plant. I have this manufacturing plant that makes widgets.
Yep.
Well, I think I've tuned it as much as possible from a manual standpoint, right? I got my workers and my shifts, and I figured that out. But now I'm saying, hey, I need to draw more efficiencies in a recession, tougher environment. So I need more data. I need more analytics on how those systems are performing. And I want to bring that back and forecast and predict how I can perform better to return better profits.
Sure.
So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I need that compute power down here, and I need to bring that data, the information to analyze up from that OT environment. That plant, the how the machine's working, the plants, even the lights, the heat in the plant.
Yep.
All of those types of systems, I want to bring them all together so I can do that, analyze, and predict how I can do better. Okay, so that is what we're calling IT-OT convergence, right? You're taking the information from the OT system and you're bringing it to the IT system at the edge, right?
Sure.
Right at the edge of that cloud environment. And I call that, I like to call that the fog, right? because if you've ever been in these spaces, I mean, you're taking, in some cases, 40, 10, 20, 30, 40-year-old OT systems.
Yep.
And you've been connecting them over years where, we've gone in and out of recessions, and you're saying, hey, I need these data sets at different times, and now I can analyze that, now I can analyze that. And so you're starting to, you've run all this connectivity, and I call it the fog because we're not exactly sure how and where everything is connected at this point.
Yeah.
And that brings your security issue in.
Right.
So now you have access and you have a myriad of connectivity.
Sure.
And you're doing that analysis in the fog.
Right.
We all know asset management is very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's
sure.
difficult to do.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to bring that security. Because we're seeing now, and we'll continue to see that increasing IT-OT convergence in the fog. And that's where we can do different things to protect against it, right? Whether it be monitoring the net flows out in the spaces that we know it's connected, looking laterally at traffic between the OT systems and the IT systems.
Right.
And then on top of it, we can do some isolation. So we could do things like, hey, we're going to provide hardware isolation, which is, your classic air-gapped or disconnected.
Sure.
We can also provide software isolation where we're saying, hey, this aggregator of information, right? They're bringing in all the sensor data. And then you have a separate system, software isolated, that's doing the compiling and the computing of it, and then the prediction of it. You can actually software isolate those systems to provide a better security layer. So even if an adversary did get in, they couldn't necessarily move laterally and and break something. And so
they can't pivot out of that, traverse down that chain down to the endpoint where it's the most dangerous.
Right. And overheat a system or cause a system to break, which may cost millions of dollars.
Or safety issues.
Bingo. That's what I was going to say. Or a safety issue with a human on the loop there working on the system. That's right.
Absolutely. So it's easy to see in manufacturing. It's easy to see even in power utility. What, with your experience in like maritime, like what about ships and whether they're commercial or even, in the Navy or in Coast Guard military type environments? How's it impacting there? I mean, I'm sure there's cloud-based capabilities and satellite communications and all that kind of stuff brought onto basically a rolling city that's in the ocean.
That's right. So ships and platforms are more connected than ever before.
Right.
The irony is the traditional mariners are also the let's say they don't like change. Right. I'm out at sea. It's the last true monarchy. It's called the last true monarchy because the captain of the ship, he's out there all by himself. He or she, they're the one in charge.
Yep.
It's the last monarchy known to man.
Right.
So anything that can erode at that isn't always looked upon nicely, right?
Sure.
So if you're telling me you could reach out and touch me over the internet, and essentially, change my decision-making process, I don't really like to hear about that.
Right.
So we've struggled, right? That was one of my major focus areas on the National Security Council is bringing out, which eventually got signed by the president, is the National Maritime Cybersecurity Plan. And that was driving on, hey, how do we protect and reinforce America's economic power through cybersecurity in the maritime domain? So specifically, we looked at how everything in a port environment is a giant logistics train.
Sure.
Right? You have ships coming in at certain times. You have intermodal transport of goods, whether it be energy products or whether it be cargo containers of, Christmas gifts.
Right.
It comes off the ship, goes on a train, goes on a truck. Other things go on a ship. And you have this constant flow of economic value in and out of the port environment. And meanwhile, ships are coming on and off. People are coming in and out of the port. And now it's a very digitized environment.
Sure.
So we sat there and we said, even down to the cranes, right? You have automated cargo cranes and cargo carriers.
Right.
And we said, so how do we provide America a level of security there? Because other nations have recognized this as well. And they've recognized that, hey, we can slow the economic power down of a country by freezing their ability to move goods.
Right.
If I freeze a port, I slow the economic power down. And at the same time, I was slowing the military power down.
Sure.
Not sure every citizen knows this, but the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, Marines, Space Force, they don't move their own stuff. The commercial sector does it.
Right.
They go to war, it's commercial ships that carry those tanks over to wherever the war is being fought.
Right.
And so that means another nation could effectively win battles because you can't manifest the force.
Right.
So we thought about that and we're like, hey, we need to protect this in America. And so we worked on different ways to, provide security in different spaces there. And interesting, but the initial response was always, whoa, hey, we don't want regulations here.
Right.
And the irony is like, we're not talking about regulation at this point. We're just talking about visibility.
Sure.
We have no idea what happens in ports. For instance, China claimed a cyber attack at a port in California. No one's actually seen the reporting on that. They claimed it. They stopped operations. It was their terminal, right? They stopped operations. Everybody's like, okay. And then they said, hey, we got it fixed and we're back online.
Right.
What happened? Nah, don't worry about it. We're not going to tell you. So you've stopped economic activity. May or may not have been a cyber attack.
Sure.
And then you resumed it at your, time and date of your choosing, which kind of seems like you're imposing, costs on the U.S.
Sure.
Right? To have different ships run aground where we haven't done a cyber. There's been no cyber forensics done. Right? We don't know why it happened. There's a couple NTSB reports that essentially say that, like, we are unsure why this happened. We assume it has to be pilot error,
right,
or captain error, mariner error.
Yep.
But like the mariner says it's not their fault, and we can't
prove
validate.
otherwise. Yeah,
they can't prove otherwise. So we were saying, how do we actually like start to monitor that space?
Right. And what's the answer? Like, all of these verticals have this problem, whether it's manufacturing and power utility and mariners. It's all the same problem. They don't like change. We're talking about systems that impact. The best definition I've heard of OT is technology that the endpoint does. There's some physical action done, right? So it's moving a valve, it's opening a door, it's moving steam, whatever it is. There's a physical connection to something.
Right.
And with that physical connection, the CIA triad, it's not around, it's not really focused on confidentiality. It's really more around that availability and
integrity and availability, right?
Yeah.
Integrity being that you said move this
correct
through an electronic command.
Yep.
And it moved based on your command, and then availability that, hey, it was available to move. Right.
Absolutely. And that availability is also really tied to also safety, because, hey, I want to move this, but hey, it's safe to do so. And I'm not Stuxnet. I'm not going to blow up I'm not going to overpressure it and make it a turbine explode or whatever. Or run a ship to ground or any number of other, a colonial pipeline. Like, that wasn't even an OT attack, but it impacted the OT environment. And I hear a lot of back and forth. Well, that wasn't an OT attack, but at the end of the day, the attack stopped gas going down that pipeline because of that impact, which means it impacted the OT system. Yes, they punched it out, but it happened. So it was an attack that implicated and impacted the OT environment. And that could be done in maritime. That could be done anywhere. It doesn't matter that it was an IT system, technically. It matters what was the impact. At the end of the day, it impacted the gas.
What was the consequence? Right? That's right. I like to think about, for instance, we just saw it last week in the maritime space where the European profiling company got ransomware.
Right.
Technically, that's not an OT system.
Sure.
But hey, if the ships aren't certified, then can't move. And then NotPetya, right? So NotPetya was an IT attack on a Windows system.
Right.
But because you lost shipping manifests and logs for business transactions, you couldn't move the cargo. Or at least you couldn't move the cargo as fast, right? Now it became singularly down to old style, pen and paper and moving cargo in and out of ports, which really our custom system isn't set up to do that. The other nations' custom systems isn't, they don't have the manpower to do that. So you've slowed commerce. You've imposed a cost. I mean, we had ships in NotPetya. There was ports that had delays up to 2 weeks. Yeah. Right? That's an economic cost.
Yeah.
So when we say like, it wasn't, that's like saying when your kids, you're home with your brothers and sisters and you break mom's china because you all were playing baseball in the house.
Right.
You're like, I didn't do it. And you're like,
it was Bobby.
Yeah, Bobby threw the ball, but frankly, you were at bat. If you actually had hit the ball instead of missing it, it wouldn't have hit the china.
Exactly. Yeah. So all this to say, we've talked about a lot of things today. If you could focus on, if you were the czar and you could make anything possible, what is something that you feel that you could impact or that we should look at to really focus on improving all these areas, whether it be visibility, understanding, unlimited budgets, regulation? Like, what is the key thing that you think, the string to pull that can help some of this?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with two different answers on this, two different ways.
Sure.
I'd like to do them both.
Yeah.
The first one is we have to understand who's investing in the U.S. in technology in our supply chain.
Yep.
And that's a full stop right now, right? Like there are other countries around the world that we have economic dependence on.
Sure.
That don't allow us to invest in their, commercial enterprise system.
Right.
Yet we openly have allowed them to do it in ours.
Right.
In fact, we rely on it in many of the electronics and digital devices that we use today.
Yeah.
And what we're doing there is we're allowing them to essentially infect the supply chain if they so chose.
Yeah.
And we've proven it. We've proven it that they have infected the supply chain.
Sure.
And I'm just going to use, Huawei as the example.
Right.
So Huawei is a Chinese networking company that is owned by the Chinese Communist Party.
Yep.
Who is our adversary, who has declared that they are our adversary, and we've declared that we have two presidents in a row right now said we're their adversary.
Yep.
And we've proven both governments around the world and private sector entities have proven that they purposefully put hard-coded, security flaws, backdoors, listening devices. They've been caught red-handed. And yet, we in the private sector are still like considering purchasing things like that, right? Like there's places that purchase it. And it's like if I could do something about that supply chain and just say, hey, adversarial countries can't do it. Yeah. You're not in the supply chain.
Yep.
Right? That would be, whack one, right?
Yeah.
And it would solve a lot of problems, because even when we think about like cloud computing,
sure,
one of the issues that we dealt with at the White House is we sell things like cloud providers will take any customer.
Sure.
Right? They don't necessarily know all the customers. It's a digital persona that buys something. You don't necessarily know where that's located, where, who it really is.
Right.
And so we're granting adversaries space in our digital terrain.
Yep.
At no cost.
Right.
The small cost that they pay to do it, but the impact that can be posed by their activity is the greater problem.
Exponential.
Yeah, right. And so I would end that. Like I would say, hey, you have to know who your customer is, and you can't be a customer of an adversary.
Right.
So I'd go there, and then that'd be my first activity. And my second activity is I think we still struggle to understand the connectivity of our networks. So I don't know if you call this necessarily directly, it's not singularly like asset management.
Right.
But we have to find ways to do better, to understand, get through the fog.
Sure.
Of, what we were talking about, that IT/OT convergence, and figuring out, what we have, what systems, and not only how it impacts me and my singular, business, but as we saw in Colonial Pipeline, right? How does that impact the downstream aspects? How does that impact the other players in the environment? So if I could work those two areas, I think that would. I think
that'd be a great start. And you look in OT spaces, and there's a lot of great products out there. Passive monitors and a lot of things that are getting some of that asset visibility. And it's a great start, but you've got to tie, I think to your point is you've got to tie that stuff to what its function is, what its impact is, where it sits in the system. So just knowing that I've got this PLC, it's a great thing to start with. It's better than not knowing. But the next step is okay, now what? What is that thing to me? So I know, that was one of the things with the Colonial Pipeline is they didn't know how far down the chain it went. So
that's right.
One of the decisions was to turn it off, and because they didn't know the overall impact, because they didn't understand their network. They didn't understand what assets they had, where they were, and where those protections were. And it goes back to that security, that in-depth security of, I've got to do more than just, there is no silver bullet. I can't just go buy a product and implement it and say, okay, I've got firewalls, I'm good,
I'm done.
I'm done, right? It's got to be a bigger thing, and I've got to continually. And I think the other piece that I see and it frustrates me is, we go do these capital projects. We talked about a rate case early in this conversation, and hey, we go do this $100 million, $300 million program. Okay, I'm done with it now. I'm not done with cybersecurity journey. It's an ever-ending, ever-changing. The adversaries are changing what they're doing, which means we have to get one step ahead. They only have to be right once. We have to be right all the time. So we're constantly having to go back and say, okay, I know we just finished this last thing, but we've got to do more. We've got to do more. So how much of that is from a leadership perspective and a financial perspective is frustrating to that ship captain or that plant manager or that CEO that says, we just spent $100 million on cybersecurity. How much more do I have to spend?
That's right. Yeah. That's definitely a difficult answer. I mean, in the we're always talking about trade-offs.
Sure.
Right. And I'd still say we're making the trade-off on cybersecurity and not investing,
right?
Because it's still too amorphous for people, right? It's still not tangible enough, that they can't understand that consequence. If you can't get the consequence, you can't build the resiliency.
I've heard it a lot. Like, well, this plant's been running for 40 years and we've never had a cyber incident. Okay, or maybe you have. Maybe you have, and you just don't know because you have no tools to know if you did. The last time the plant tripped could have been a cyber incident. You just don't know it. And cyber incident also doesn't mean China, bad actor, is attacking me. It could be Bob. And the FAA, the most recent FAA thing that just came out, right, is a contractor accidentally deleted some files and the system went down. That's a cyber incident.
It is.
Right? It's not a bad actor hacking something. It's not all, the movies with a guy in his hoodie up and sitting in a Kali Linux box and attacking it, right? A cyber incident can be just a guy that made a mistake and deleted some code. Being a systems administrator in my past, I've walked up to a rack of servers back in the day and thought I was on this server that I was doing maintenance on, and I was actually on a different server and rebooted the wrong server. Like, that's a cyber incident. It does. Again, it's not. And I'm not a bad guy. I'm not a bad actor. I just made a mistake, but I still impacted something with a logical login and logging in the wrong box and doing the wrong thing, deleting something. It's very easy to do, and it's something we've been dealing with in IT forever. And in OT, it's just been this trust us. I'd rather security by obscurity. You don't know about my environment. Just stay out of my ship. Stay out of my manufacturing facility. Stay out of my plant. Don't bring your stuff over here. And that's just not enough anymore.
Yeah, it's just not real. Anybody who's saying that, it's like, that's just not the environment that we live in these days. I mean, the majority, when I was working private sector in energy, we saw multiple incidents and we thought systems were, disconnected, protected, whatever. And they would pop online because some third-party player that we had provided access to, decided that their life was easier if they plugged in a cellular modem. Right. You can't predict that or cross-connected some networks that were supposed to be segmented.
Right. It's easy to say it's isolated, and then you walk back in and somebody's plugged in. They've bypassed your firewall. They've un-air-gapped your air gap.
Right. Exactly. So.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, man, I appreciate the time. Why don't you is there anything you want us to connect with, or how can people get a hold of you if they want some more information around what you guys do or anything like that?
Sure. So LinkedIn is by far my best piece of communication aspect. I don't really do any other social media or very, very limited.
Right.
But love to talk about software and hardware isolation. That's the space I'm at BedRock, and specifically at IT/OT Convergence, and just cybersecurity issues and policy in general at the U.S. National level are always interesting to me. So the best way to get a hold of me is definitely through LinkedIn, Sean Plankey on LinkedIn. I think there's maybe one other one of me, but you can figure it out pretty quick.
So you're telling me you're not on TikTok then?
No, definitely not. If I'm on TikTok, there's a problem. You should reach out immediately.
That's right. Well, I'm not either. So it'll be hard for me to find you. Awesome, sir. Well, I appreciate your time today, and look forward to seeing you at S4, and we'll shake hands and have a beer.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast. If you got some valuable information from today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Aaron and to get your free copy of the OT Cybersecurity Solution Buyer's Guide, go to industrialdefender.com. That's industrialdefender.com, or you can click the link in the show notes.